It never seems to fail. I get into the flow of work, and I'm in my groove. Then, my phone rings. I wouldn't mind if it was a friend, family member, or someone calling about work, but it's usually a spam caller. It's gotten to the point where if I don't recognize the number, I just ignore it. But then I have a problem getting back into the flow of work, and I end up working later than I was expecting. To combat this, I now use Aura, who's today's sponsor. Did you know that data brokers get rich by selling your information to these spammers, robocallers, and other people who want your information? This information includes where you live. Personally, I hate the idea that someone is making a fortune by selling my info to people who, at best, annoy me, and at worst, want to scam me. How Aura helps is that they can identify data brokers who expose your information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. If a request is submitted, the brokers legally need to remove your information, but these data brokers are slippery and make it difficult to opt out. So let Aura handle it for you. And this is just one useful tool that's available with Aura. They also protect you and your family from online threats you may not even be aware of. There are so many apps that do one thing, like password managers or VPNs, but Aura is like a toolbox with many different tools, like the aforementioned password manager and VPN, plus antivirus, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. You can get all this protection at an affordable price. Why not let Aura do all the hard work of keeping you safe? You can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can go to aura.com/paranormallylisted to start your 2-week free trial. Also linked below in the description. Protect yourself online and help support Paranormally Listed by checking out Aura today. Number 3. Private Lee Davis. The year is 1943 and World War II is raging in Europe. The United States joined the Allied forces 2 years earlier after the attack on Pearl Harbor. With the influx of American GIs coming to Europe to fight, the British gave the Americans places to station their soldiers on British land. 1.5 million American servicemen were housed in these accommodations between 1942 and 1944. However, having that many men come over, there was bound to be some troublemakers. The British government allowed the U.S. to lock these men up in one of their facilities, even giving them use of their hangman, Albert Pierpoint, and his uncle, Thomas Pierpoint. The facility was Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset County, southwest England, about 125 miles from London. Shepton Mallet Prison was built in 1625 to comply with the Bridewell Act of King James in 1610. The Bridewell Act required all counties in England to have a House of Corrections. Initially, it housed men, women, and children. Unsurprisingly, the conditions were awful. In 1790, more land was purchased to expand the prison. Because of pleading from some prisoners, women and men were then separated. Between 1870 and 1822, the prison was expanded again, giving the prison capacity to hold about 200 inmates. In the 1840s, Ilchester Gaol, another prison, closed, and all the prisoners were sent to Shepton Mallet, which led to overcrowding. At this time, 270 inmates were held there, with 8 men in a cell. But the prison had become underused by the turn of the 20th century. In 1904, there was a fire, and the conditions got worse. Between 1889 and 1926, 7 hangings were performed at the Shepton Mallet Prison. There are no records of how many executions were performed there before 1889. By 1929, the prison had housed 151 inmates, so it was closed the following year. After the British declared war on Germany, the prison was reopened in October 1939 to house the British military. Not long after the reopening, 300 men were living in the prison. Some men had to live in huts on the prison grounds. The prison was then given to the Americans in 1942, and that is when Private Lee Davis entered Shepton Mallet Prison. Lee Davis was an 18-year-old black American GI who was stationed in England. On September 28, 1943, Davis was drinking at a tavern in Marlborough, Wiltshire. When he left the tavern, he was drunk. As he walked back to the base, he encountered 19-year-old Cynthia June Lay and 22-year-old Muriel Fondin. Both women worked at a nearby hospital. Lay was a cook and Fondin was a clerk. Davis was armed with a rifle, and he told the women to stop walking. Leigh ran, and Davis fired 3 shots at her. She was shot twice in the head. Davis then took Fodden into a field, and over several hours, he sexually assaulted her. Fodden then convinced Davis to let her go. She went and found help. A search of the area was conducted. The body of 19-year-old Cynthia Leigh was found. Near her body was a hat that belonged to an American soldier. The soldier was interviewed, and he said he had lent the hat to Davis. Davis was questioned, and he confessed to the murder. Davis threw himself on the mercy of the court, claiming he was blackout drunk, but he was found guilty of murder. The private was sentenced to death after a one-day court-martial. Davis was sent to Shepton Malin Prison to finish the last days of his short life. During his prison sentence, Davis was known to be a chain smoker. On December 14, 1943, Davis was brought to the newly built gallows. As Davis was being led from his cell to the hidden doorway, he got his first glimpse of the gallows and is alleged to have said, "Oh my God, I'm going to die," before becoming hysterical. Executioner Thomas Pierpoint hung Davis, making him the 3rd U.S. serviceman to be executed in England. During the Americans' time at Shepton Malin Prison, they executed 18 soldiers, 16 were hanged, and 2 faced a firing squad. 90% of the army was white. Of the executed men, 10 were black and 3 were Hispanic. At the end of the war, the British government took over Shepton Malin Prison again to house their military personnel. The Cray twins, Ronnie and Reggie, who were notable gangster twin brothers, were housed at this time. In 1966, the prison was returned for civilian use. The gallows execution block was turned into a library. Between 1973 and 2012, it housed people serving 4 years or less and people who continued to reoffend and had problems reforming. On March 28, 2013, Shepton Malin Prison closed its doors to inmates. On Christmas Eve 2014, it was announced that Shepton Malin Prison and 3 other prisons were being sold to the respective cities and counties. They have now been opened to the public and guided tours are offered. Stories of ghosts started to emerge with tours of the prison. Guests of the Shepton Malin Prison have seen the ghost of a woman wearing an 18th century white dress. According to legend, she was sentenced to death after killing her fiancé during a lover's tiff. The night before the execution, she asked to wear a wedding dress to bed. In the morning, they found her dead. She supposedly died of a broken heart. Her ghost is mostly seen in A Wing. During a tour in 2017, another ghost left his mark. In the autumn, tour guide Paul Toole was giving a tour throughout the prison when they arrived at the cell which housed Private Lee Davis. Before following the same path as Davis did to the execution room, Toole was telling the story of Davis's last moments. After saying Davis's last words, "Oh my God, I'm going to die," Toole felt a burning sensation on his hand. As the tour concluded, Toole looked down to see what looked like a cigarette burn. Was this Davis's ghost trying to reach out? Was he trying to say something? Was he unfairly treated because of his skin color? Those questions can't be answered, but the incident has shaken Toole, so he no longer locks up the prison alone. He claims the lights go on and off, doors banging can be heard, and prison areas suddenly become really cold. Shepton Malin Prison is still open to the public, and they have guided and self-guided tours. They also have 2 escape rooms inside the former prison. Special events are hosted, including spending the night behind bars and paranormal investigations. Number 2. Raymond Snowden. On the night of September 23, 1956, newly widowed Cora Dean went to downtown Garden City, Iowa, to drink and gamble her depression away. The mother of 2's dead body was found the next day. She had been stabbed 29 times. A pathologist determined that her throat had been slashed first and a blade had been plunged into the base of her skull. Then the killer dug the knife around until he severed her spinal cord. After a quick investigation, Detective Frank Bohr has suspect, Raymond Snowden. Bohr remembers locking up Snowden years before for threatening his girlfriend by saying he would cut her spinal cord. After a witness came forward and said that Snowden was with Dean on the night she was killed, Bohr knew he had found the killer. Snowden was arrested after entering Hannafin's cigar store in Boise, Idaho. Before he entered the store, Snowden had thrown a knife into the gutters in front of the store. The police collected the knife, which they later determined was the murder weapon. After Snowden was arrested, he confessed that he had killed Dean because she had turned down his advances. He told the police that he took his knife out and told her, "Take your pick, honey, rape or death." Dean screamed, and then Snowden slashed her throat and stabbed her. Finally, he severed her spinal cord. Snowden was sentenced to death and sent to the old Idaho Penitentiary until his execution date. The old Idaho Penitentiary was built in 1872, just southeast of Boise, Idaho. It started as a single-cell prison, which grew to several buildings that housed 600 inmates at a time and were surrounded by a 17-foot sandstone wall. In its 101 years of service, it hosted over 13,000 inmates, including Harry Orchard and Lydia Southard. Orchard is known for the 1905 assassination of former Idaho Governor Frank Steunenberg. Southard was a female serial killer suspected of killing her 4 husbands, brother-in-law, and daughter with arsenic. She escaped the old Idaho Penitentiary in May 1931, but she was recaptured in Denver, Colorado a year later, and she was returned to the prison. During Raymond Snowden's time in prison, he bragged about killing 2 other women. However, these claims could not be confirmed, and he was never convicted of the murders. On October 18, 1957, Snowden was brought to the newly constructed gallows room. Snowden was prepared for execution, and officers pulled the lever, releasing the trapdoor. Unfortunately for Snowden, his neck did not break, and he hung for 15 minutes while the victim's family watched him struggle to breathe. He finally stopped breathing and was pronounced dead. Snowden, dubbed the Jack Ripper of Idaho, was the last man executed in the old Idaho Penitentiary. He was buried in an unmarked grave on the prison grounds. In 1973, the old Idaho Penitentiary was closed, and it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. After this, guided tours were offered at the prison. A lot of guests claimed to hear disembodied voices laughing and screaming. Throughout the years, many paranormal investigations have occurred. Investigators have claimed to see apparitions of Snowden wandering around the prison grounds. Many people say they can hear Snowden struggling to breathe when entering the gallows room. Many paranormal investigation shows, including Destination Fear and Ghost Adventures, have recorded shows at the old Idaho Penitentiary. During the Ghost Adventures investigation, they recorded the ghost of a hooded man. Could this be Raymond Snowden? Today, the prison is a museum, and Snowden's cell is marked with a sign indicating where he lived out his last days. However, the cell lights remain off. Number 1. Patrick Whelan. Patrick Whelan was born in 1840 in the county of Galloway, Ireland. At the age of 14, he became a tailor's apprentice. Whelan had a wandering life and traveled to England. Then, in 1865, he moved to Canada. He took up residency in Quebec City, where he worked as a tailor. He joined the volunteer cavalry and helped defend the province of Quebec against the Fenian raids. The Fenian raids were several attacks from the Fenian Brotherhood, an Irish Republican militia based in the United States. They would attack targets in Canada, which was then part of Britain, to add pressure to withdraw troops from Ireland. During those attacks, Whelan was suspected of being an Irish Republican sympathizer. He was arrested, but later released without court-martial proceedings. After he was released, he moved around again. He went to Buffalo, New York, then to Hamilton, Ontario, and then finally Montreal, Quebec. While in Montreal, he met a woman 30 years his senior named Bridget Boyle. She came from an upper-class family. In 1867, Whelan married Boyle, and they moved to Ottawa, Ontario, where he found work as a merchant tailor. On the morning of April 7, 1868, Thomas Darcy McGee was returning to his boarding house on Spark Street in Ottawa. While fumbling with his keys, the owner of the boarding house, Marianne Trotter, opened the door. Then a flash and a bang tore through the morning quietness. McGee was shot in the back of the neck, and the bullet exited through his jaw, knocking out his dentures. A crowd came running to help, but no one saw the assassin. He was declared dead by a single shot from a .32 caliber gun. McGee was most notably known for being one of the fathers of the Canadian Confederation. Although born in Ireland, McGee had denounced the Fenian Brotherhood. So the police suspected the Fenian Brotherhood had something to do with the murder. By nightfall, the police had arrested 40 Irish immigrants, suspecting them of helping the Fenians. One of the most prominent suspects was Patrick Buckley, who had worked as a stable hand for the first Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald. Buckley gave the police Whelan's name as a potential suspect. The police caught up with Whelan at a tavern. He was searched, and they found a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol in his front right pocket. On April 9, 1868, Whelan was charged with the murder of McGee. During his 8-day trial, Prime Minister Macdonald, a personal friend of McGee, sat beside the judge. Ultimately, on September 15, 1868, Whelan was found guilty, and he was sentenced to be hanged. Whelan appealed to the Court of Queen's Bench of Ontario, only to be denied because the newly appointed judge was the same judge who found him guilty, and he chose not to overturn his own verdict. Whelan decided to try his luck in appealing his conviction to the Ontario Court of Appeals. However, the judge was also a voting member of that board. Whelan was sent to the Carleton County Jail, otherwise known as the Ottawa Jail, to await his fate. While in prison, Whelan wrote to an Irish Catholic priest named Dr. O'Connor. Knowing his end was near, he requested that the priest perform the ritual of extreme unction on the scaffold. Extreme unction, or otherwise anointing of the sick, is a Catholic sacrament performed on a person nearing death. On February 11, 1869, Whelan stepped out onto the gallows in front of a crowd of 5,000 spectators. With his last words, he told the onlooking crowd he was innocent, but he knew who killed McGee. He finished by saying, "God save Ireland, and God save my soul." He was then dropped and hanged until he was dead. After Whelan's execution, his widow moved back to Montreal and spent her last years as a recluse. Whelan's body was supposed to be returned to Montreal for burial. However, the authorities didn't fulfill that request and buried him in an unmarked grave on the prison grounds. The gun that was found on Whelan when he was arrested was lost. The Ottawa jail continued to operate until 1972. After it ceased operations, it was sold to a company called Hosteling International. They converted the jail into a hostel. Keeping much of the building intact, guests can spend the night in jail. The top floor of the hostel was restored to its original condition. They also conduct daily tours of the jail's death row. Around the same time that the jail was being converted into a hostel, the pistol that was found on Whelan when he was arrested was found in the family heirloom owned by a man named Scott Renwick. The gun was tested, and experts concluded that the bullet that killed McGee was fired from that gun. The gun was put up for auction over a year later, and it was eventually purchased by the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Gatineau, Quebec for $105,000. The Ottawa Jail Hostel paved over part of the graveyard to make a parking lot. The graveyard was also partially excavated for construction of the Mackenzie King Bridge, and workers found the remains of 140 bodies. Sadly, since only partial excavation was done, there are still probably a lot of bodies on the grounds. During his time as a hostel, many guests have reported creepy things. Guests have claimed that they feel shivers during the night and chills when spirits pass by them. Whelan has been reported to be seen pacing around his cell on death row. But if you think he stays on death row, you'd be wrong. People have woken up to the ghosts of Whelan sitting at the end of their beds, flipping through a book. A group staying the night in the hostel claimed to have communicated with Whelan through a Ouija board in the death row area. They said that the board was very active and they could only talk to Whelan. They started with simple questions, but when they got to questions about McGee's murder, they said the energy in the room shifted and the air became heavy and people started to feel faint. Afterward, they put the board away and left the death row area. In 2009, the hostel opened a bar inside the prison called Mugshots. 2 years later, they expanded into the courtyard of the former jail, making it an outdoor patio bar for the summer. On April 1st, 2022, the Ottawa Jail Hostel switched owners and is now under the St. Louis Hostel's management. They will still offer prison tours and have working gallows with a noose. So if you want to feel what it's like to be in prison, this might be for you. Free Wi-Fi and breakfast are included, so you don't feel like a total inmate. Ghosts may also be included. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.